The United States is buried under $37 trillion of debt, a number so big it's mathematically impossible to pay back. But instead of admitting that, Washington is quietly moving to execute a plan far older, far more aggressive, and far more dangerous than anyone is prepared for. A plan that doesn't pay off the debt, it evaporates it. And the tools they're using aren't taxes or spending cuts, they're gold. And crypto? Behind closed doors, federal agencies have already begun stockpiling assets they once mocked, restructuring reserves they once ignored, and laying the groundwork for a financial maneuver America hasn't attempted since the 1930s. And when the president signs the next order, the one everyone knows is coming, the value of the dollar, the meaning of your savings, and the entire US financial system will shift in a single night. What happens next will make perfect sense once you see the pattern. But the people who don't see it coming will wake up on the wrong side of the reset. Stay with me until the end, because this is the part no expert on TV is willing to explain. And if you want more hidden financial truth like this, make sure to subscribe. This story is just beginning. The United States owes $37 trillion. That number is so big most people can't even mentally process it. It's larger than the GDP of every country on Earth except the US itself. It's more money than the entire global economy produced in a single year back in 2002. And here's the uncomfortable truth every politician refuses to say out loud. America is never paying this back. Not in 10 years, not in 50, not in 100. The math isn't broken. The math is dead. But the US government does have a plan, and it's not default, it's not spending cuts, and it's definitely not raising taxes. No, the plan is much older, much stealthier, and much more dangerous. It's a plan that has saved collapsing empires for thousands of years. A strategy that lets governments erase impossible debts without firing a shot or admitting failure. And right now, the US is executing that plan in plain sight, using two assets almost nobody expects: gold and crypto. If you think Bitcoin is a rebellion against governments, think again. If you think gold is a relic of the past, you're about to see it brought back to life. Because Washington isn't trying to pay the debt. Washington is trying to dilute the debt, quietly, strategically, invisibly, and the mechanism they're building will change the value of every dollar in your pocket, every savings account, every retirement plan, without you voting on it, and without anyone ever calling it what it really is: legalized devaluation. But this plan didn't start last month. It started years ago, and the clues were hiding in plain sight. The first clue: the government already holds more Bitcoin than almost any corporation on Earth. Not because they bought it, but because they seized it. Silk Road, Bitfinex, ransomware networks, tens of billions worth. At first, it looked like a fluke. Then it started looking like a strategy. Agencies weren't auctioning the seized Bitcoin the way they used to. They were holding onto it, quietly, selectively, deliberately. Then came the executive order, establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve. The phrase sounds harmless, even patriotic, like stocking barrels of oil or wheat. But the government doesn't create strategic reserves unless those reserves are intended to be used. And when the government starts accumulating an asset, there's only one reason: leverage, power, a monetary weapon. And here's where the pattern becomes unmistakable, because the United States has done this before. In 1933, drowning in debt and deflation, the government didn't pay its debts. It changed the price of the collateral backing those debts. They confiscated gold from citizens at $20.67 an ounce. And then, once they had control, revalued it to $35 with one stroke of the pen. They increased the value of their gold reserves by nearly 70% and instantly reduced the real weight of their debt. Citizens lost purchasing power. The government gained solvency. The textbooks call it monetary policy. You and I would call it wealth extraction. Fast forward to today, and the setup looks uncannily similar. The US government officially holds 8,133 tons of gold. But here's the shocking part. Most Americans don't know, on the official US books, that gold is still valued at $42.22 per ounce. Now look at the global stage. Central banks are buying gold at the fastest pace in 70 years. China, Russia, India, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, they're dumping US treasuries and stacking hard assets. These countries aren't stupid. They're preparing for a world where fiat money, especially the dollar, goes through a major repricing. A reset. So here's the plan. In plain English, the US is building a parallel system. One part backed by Bitcoin, the emerging store of value. One part backed by gold, the ancient store of value. Both assets accumulated quietly, then revalued loudly. And when they revalue Bitcoin and gold upward, the dollar devalues downward. That's not a side effect. That's the point. Imagine this. The US quietly accumulates 1 million Bitcoin through seizures, fines, and shadow purchases. Then one day, in a televised announcement framed as strengthening America's financial leadership, the Treasury declares that for strategic reserve purposes, Bitcoin will be valued at $1 million per coin, instantly turning a $120 billion stash into a $1 trillion asset on the government's balance sheet. Simultaneously, they revalue gold, not to $3,000, not to $5,000, but to $20,000 per ounce. Suddenly, the US gold reserves aren't worth $700 billion. They re-worth more than $5 trillion. With 2 announcements, they've manufactured $6 trillion in new asset value. You know what that means? The debt-to-GDP ratio collapses without paying a single creditor. The government becomes solvent again, but the cost is paid by you. Because when gold goes from $2,800 to $20,000, that's not gold rising, that's the dollar falling. When Bitcoin goes from $100,000 to $1 million, that's not Bitcoin getting stronger, that's the dollar getting weaker. The groceries you buy, the rent you pay, the savings you worked your whole life for. All repriced, all devalued. This isn't inflation in the normal sense. This is systemic repricing, a currency shock disguised as policy reform. And when the dust settles, the government's debt burden will have evaporated. But the middle class's purchasing power will have evaporated with it. And here's the final kicker. Everything needed to execute this plan is already in motion. Strategic Bitcoin reserve in place. Gold quietly being reaffirmed as a backbone asset, happening record central bank gold purchases worldwide. Already underway, crisis justification. Just a debt ceiling fight away. But once the US flips the switch, there is no unflipping it. No warning, no vote. No going back. The only question is whether you recognize what's happening before the reset or after it. If you want to see how average people survive these transitions and how those who weren't prepared lost everything, stay with me until the end and make sure you subscribe, because what happens next determines whether you're on the winning side of the reset or the side that gets wiped out.